The neighbor knocked on my son's cabin door at 6 in the morning, and the look on his face made my stomach drop before he even said a word. I remember thinking, I don't know this man. I've never seen him before in my life. And yet he was staring at me like he'd been waiting for me to answer that door for a long time. You're Nolan's father, he said. It wasn't a question. I am, I said. He glanced past me into the cabin. Is he here? Not until tonight. He had to work. The man, maybe 60, maybe older, wearing a canvas jacket with mud on the sleeve, nodded slowly, too slowly, like he was deciding something. Then we need to talk, he said, before he gets back. I almost didn't let him in. I'd driven 4 hours from Richmond to spend Thanksgiving week at my son's new cabin in the Blue Ridge, and the last thing I wanted at 6 in the morning was a conversation I didn't understand. But something in his voice stopped me from closing the door. Something careful, something that sounded less like a threat and more like a warning from someone who already knew how this ended if I didn't listen. His name was Sid. He lived a quarter-mile down the road, in a stone house his grandfather had built. He'd been watching the cabin since my son bought it 8 months ago. Not out of nosiness, he said, out of concern. I told him to sit down and say what he came to say. He sat. He folded his hands on the kitchen table. And then he told me something that made me set down my coffee cup very carefully, because I didn't trust my hands anymore. I should back up. My name is Edmund, Ed, most people call me. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the state of Virginia, designed bridges, retired with a decent pension and a house in Richmond that's been paid off since 2019. My wife Rosalind passed 4 years ago. Breast cancer. We were married 39 years. After she died, it was just me and our son Nolan. He's 34. Works in commercial real estate. Smart kid, always was. Got his mother's instincts for reading people, or so I thought. 18 months ago, Nolan married a woman named Petra. I want to be fair about Petra. She's sharp, she's organized, she knows exactly what she wants. Those are not bad qualities. But there was something in the way she looked at me sometimes, when she thought I wasn't watching, that I could never quite name. Not dislike. More like calculation. They bought the Blue Ridge cabin together about 8 months ago. Nice place, 2 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, right on a small creek. I'd only seen it in photos. When Nolan called me in October and invited me up for Thanksgiving week, I thought it was a peace offering of sorts. The previous year had been strained. I'd made an offhand comment about the speed of the wedding, and Petra hadn't forgiven me for it. So I packed a bag and drove up. I arrived Tuesday afternoon, the week before Thanksgiving. Nolan and Petra were coming Thursday morning. I had the cabin to myself for 2 days, which suited me fine. I liked the quiet. I liked making my own coffee and reading on the porch without anyone checking on me. The first night was fine. The second night I slept badly, which I wrote off to the unfamiliar bed and the altitude. I woke at 2 in the morning with a headache I couldn't shake, drank 2 glasses of water and went back to sleep. The second day I noticed I was foggy in a way that felt off. I'm not a foggy person. I've always been sharp. My doctor says so. My former colleagues said so. But that Wednesday I lost my car keys for 40 minutes, forgot I'd already made lunch and made it again, and spent 20 minutes looking for my reading glasses before realizing they were on my face. I chalked it up to poor sleep and the change in routine. Then Sid knocked on the door Thursday morning. He told me he'd seen Nolan at the cabin 6 weeks earlier, in October, just after they'd bought the place. Nolan had come up alone that time. Petra had stayed home. Sid had introduced himself, neighborly, offered to keep an eye on the property when they were gone. Nolan had been friendly, appreciative even. But a week after that visit, Sid's wife, who volunteered at the county assessor's office, mentioned something she'd seen in passing. A change of beneficiary filing on a property trust, the cabin. Nolan had restructured the ownership in a way that, if anything happened to him, passed everything not to Petra, but to Petra and her brother jointly. Her brother, a man named Kirk, had been in and out of county court 3 times in the last decade for financial fraud. That's not a crime, I said carefully. A man can leave his cabin to whoever he wants. No, Sid agreed. It's not a crime. That's not why I'm here. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and set a small orange prescription bottle on my kitchen table. I looked at it. The label had been torn off. I found that on your back porch, he said, yesterday morning, tucked between the railing post and the exterior wall. Like someone had put it there in a hurry, meaning to come back for it. I picked it up. It was about a third full of small white tablets, unscored, no markings. I used to work pharmacovigilance, Sid said, 30 years with FDA enforcement before I retired. I know what those are. Those are Zolpidem, sleeping medication, high dose, non-prescription quantity. I set the bottle back down. Someone put sedatives on my back porch, I said. Someone put them near your food preparation area, he said. You mentioned you've been sleeping poorly, feeling foggy. I thought about the headache at 2 in the morning, the keys, the glasses on my face. How would they get into I stopped. The coffee. I'd been drinking the cabin's coffee, the pre-ground stuff left in the pantry. I'd assumed Nolan had stalked it for my arrival. Sid watched me figure it out. He didn't say anything, he just waited. I want to be honest about what happened inside me in that moment. It wasn't rage. I've heard people describe betrayal as a fire, something hot and consuming. For me, it was the opposite. It was cold. Like something had opened in the floor beneath me and cold air was coming up through it. This was my son. My son, who I had coached through Little League and driven to college orientations and stood next to at his mother's funeral. My son who called me every Sunday, or used to, before Petra. I picked up my phone and called him. He answered on the second ring, cheerful, "Dad, you sleep okay up there?" "I slept fine," I said. "When are you and Petra leaving?" "Couple hours. Traffic's going to be a nightmare." "You good? Need anything?" "No," I said. "I'm good. Drive safe." I hung up. Sid was watching me. "I'm not leaving," I said. He nodded, like he'd expected that. "Then we do this carefully." Here's what I didn't know about Sid Beauchamp until he told me. Before he worked FDA enforcement, he'd spent 6 years as a county sheriff's deputy. He still had friends in law enforcement. He'd already made 2 phone calls that morning, one to a friend at the Augusta County Sheriff's Office, one to a contact at the Virginia State Police. He'd also, before he knocked on my door, taken photographs of the orange bottle in situ, bagged a sample of the coffee grounds from my pantry in a Ziploc he'd brought from home, and noted the tire tracks on the access road that suggested someone had come to the cabin Tuesday night after I'd arrived. After I'd gone to sleep, he was methodical in the way that only people who have spent decades doing methodical work can be. He didn't rush. He explained each step. He asked my permission before touching anything. "What do you think the goal was?" I asked him at one point. He was quiet for a moment. "A man arrives at a cabin alone," he said. "He's 68. He's been sedated, lightly, enough to impair his judgment, make him seem confused. He signed some paperwork while he's up here. Property transfer, maybe. Power of attorney. He doesn't remember signing it clearly because he wasn't fully himself. Maybe he has a fall. Maybe he just becomes over time someone who seems to be declining, someone who needs help managing his affairs." I thought about Rosalind's life insurance payout. I thought about my pension. I thought about the house in Richmond, paid off, valued at just under $400,000 in the current market. "This isn't about the cabin," I said. "No, Sid," I'd said. "I don't think it is." Nolan and Petra arrived at 2:30 that afternoon. I was sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, real tea, from a bag I'd bought myself at the gas station down the road on Sid's suggestion. Sid had gone home. We had a plan. Nolan hugged me at the door. He smelled like the same cologne he'd worn since college. He looked at me closely when we pulled apart, checking something, I thought now, checking the state of me. "You look tired, Dad," he said. "Long drive," I said. "How was yours?" Petra came in behind him with an armful of grocery bags. She kissed my cheek. She'd never done that before. It startled me more than anything else that day. "We brought everything for a real Thanksgiving," she said. "I'm going to cook the whole thing myself." "I'd love that," I said. I watched her carry the bags to the kitchen. I watched her open the pantry, glance at the coffee, and close it again without taking anything out. That night at dinner, Petra poured wine for everyone. I took a glass, swirled it, drank very little, made sure I kept track of which glass was mine. I talked about Richmond, about the neighbor's new dog, about the bridge renovation project on I-64 I'd been reading about in the news. Comfortable, boring, old man conversation. I wanted to seem relaxed. I wanted to seem like exactly what they expected me to be. After dinner, Nolan brought out a folder. "I wanted to talk to you about something while we're all together," he said. "Something I've been meaning to bring up for a while." Petra cleared the plates. She moved very efficiently. "It's about the house," Nolan said. "Your house. I've been doing some research, and honestly, Dad, from a financial planning standpoint, for your sake, it might make sense to restructure how the property is held, to protect you, from estate taxes, from probate. There's a trust structure that would—" "Who drew this up?" I asked. He blinked. "What?" "The paperwork." "Who's the attorney?" "A firm in Charlottesville. It's legitimate, Dad. I can send you their information." "That's fine," I said. "I'll have my own attorney look at it first. I'll call him Monday." Something passed across Petra's face. I'd been watching for it. "Of course," Nolan said. He smiled. "That's completely reasonable." But his hand, resting on the folder, pressed down slightly, holding it flat. The next morning I woke early and went for a walk down the access road. At the bend where the property line met Sid's driveway, I stopped. He was already there, hands in his jacket pockets, waiting. "He brought paperwork," I said. "Property trust restructure. Wanted me to sign." Sid exhaled. "Did you?" I said I'd have my attorney review it. "Good. It won't satisfy them for long." "No," he agreed. "It won't." We stood there in the cold for a moment. The creak was loud. Somewhere up on the ridge, a woodpecker was working on something. "There's something else," I said. "I'd been up half the night thinking about it. If what you're saying is right, if this has been planned, then they need me confused, impaired. They need the narrative to already be in place before they make their real move." The paperwork was meant to come after a few more days of the coffee. Sid nodded. So they're going to try something else now, I said. Because I didn't sign. Probably, he said. Which is why the Augusta County deputy is parked at the trailhead on Route 610 right now, and has been since 6 this morning. I looked at him. You called him last night? I called him when you texted me about the folder, he said, which was 9:47. He was there by 10:30. I had to look away. I'm not a man who cries easily. I hadn't cried since Rosalind's funeral, but something moved through my chest right then that I didn't quite have a name for. The knowledge that someone had been watching over me, someone who had no obligation to, who got nothing from it, while I sat at a table trying to keep my hands from shaking. It happened Saturday afternoon. Nolan suggested a hike. Just the two of us, father and son, like we used to do when he was young. Petra said she'd stay behind and prep the pie crusts. The trail behind the cabin runs along the creek for about a mile before climbing sharply toward a ridge overlook. The footing is uneven, roots and loose shale and a long drop on the right side once you get above the tree line. I've hiked harder trails in my life. I know my footing. But Nolan walked close behind me the whole way up, unusually close, and he kept mentioning the drop. Careful here, Dad. It's slippery. Watch your step on this part. You sure you want to go all the way to the top? No shame in turning back. At the overlook, he stood next to me at the edge. The valley was beautiful. Frost still in the hollows, the ridgeline turning orange in the afternoon light. Under any other circumstances, it would have moved me. You know, he said, I've been worried about you. Since Mom died, you've seemed, I don't know, not quite yourself. I feel fine, I said. The forgetting things, he said. The foggy days. It's not nothing, Dad. I looked at him, really looked at him. This was my son. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike in the parking lot of Jefferson Elementary. The boy who'd sobbed at his mother's bedside. I kept looking for that boy somewhere in his face. I haven't told you about any foggy days, I said quietly. He paused, a half second too long. Petra mentioned you seemed off when you first got here, he said. Petra wasn't here when I first got here, I said. The silence stretched out. I stepped back from the edge, not dramatically, just one deliberate step. I think we should head down, I said. The Augusta County deputy's name was Kinsley. She was waiting at the trailhead when we came back down. She had a colleague with her, and a woman from the Virginia State Police. Nolan stopped when he saw them. The look on his face, I'll carry that for the rest of my life. Not guilt, exactly. More like the look of someone who has been playing chess and just realized the other person was playing too. The rest of it moves quickly in my memory, the way overwhelming things do. Kinsley explaining that they'd obtained a warrant based on the laboratory analysis of the coffee grounds and the prescription sedatives, which had come back positive for zolpidem at a concentration too high to be accidental. Nolan's voice very controlled, saying he wanted an attorney. Petra's phone ringing in her pocket. She looked at the screen and didn't answer it. I stood to the side and let it happen. Sid was there. He'd driven down when I texted him from the trail, the word we'd agreed on. I hadn't even had to say anything. He just nodded at me across the gravel lot, and I nodded back. There's a thing that nobody tells you about betrayal. They talk about the anger, and yes, that came later, in the quiet of the drive back to Richmond. They talk about the grief. That came too. But the thing that hit me first, sitting in Kinsley's cruiser with a cup of gas station coffee she'd brought me, was something closer to relief. Because I hadn't imagined it. The fog, the headaches, the sense that something was wrong. I hadn't been losing my mind. I'd been drugged by my own son's household, in my own son's kitchen, and something in me had known it before I could name it. Rosalind would have known sooner. She always did. The charges filed eventually were not minor. Administering a controlled substance without consent, criminal conspiracy to commit financial fraud, attempted coercion involving a vulnerable adult, the Virginia statute on elder financial exploitation, which carries felony penalties I hadn't known existed until Kinsley explained them to me in that parking lot. Petra's brother Kirk, it turned out, had been the third party on the revised property trust, the one they'd been planning to use to siphon my Richmond house and Rosalind's insurance proceeds into a structure that would have looked, on paper, like responsible estate planning. The attorney in Charlottesville was a real firm. The documents were legitimate. The only thing missing was my genuine unimpaired consent. I spent Thanksgiving in Richmond, by myself, mostly. I made a small turkey breast, the kind you can roast in a Dutch oven in 2 hours. I opened a bottle of wine Rosalind, and I had been saving for a special occasion, a 2014 Bordeaux from a vineyard in Napa that did Bordeaux-style blends, the kind of thing she'd always said we were waiting for the right moment for. I poured a glass for her. I put it on the side of the table where she used to sit. I ate slowly and thought about the particular mercy of strangers. About Sid, who had no reason to knock on my door and did it anyway. About Deputy Kinsley, who had driven out to a mountain trailhead at 6 in the morning because an old retired pharmacovigilance officer called in a favor. About the way help sometimes arrives, not from the people you've spent your life loving, but from the ones you've barely met. My attorney filed the necessary paperwork the following week to ensure my estate documents were ironclad, updated, and in the hands of my accountant and a trust officer at my bank, people with legal obligations to act in my interest, not their own. I changed the lock codes on the Richmond house. I put a security camera on the front porch, the kind that records to the cloud. Nolan called me from jail on a Sunday, which was when he used to call me from wherever he was, from college, from his first apartment, from the road. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't answer. I'm not sure I was capable of it, not yet, but I didn't block number up again. I don't know what that means exactly. I'm 68 years old and I'm still figuring out what it means to be someone's father when that someone has tried to take everything you built. I'm not ready to talk. I may not be for a long time. What I know is this. I'm still here. I'm still sharp. I made a good Bordeaux last a whole evening and I remembered every glass. Rosalind would have laughed at that. She always said the best revenge was outlasting the people who underestimated you. I think she was right.